Right, thanks for joining us. I think we're ready to start. Hello and welcome to the final session of today. I'm Damien McGuinness. I'm a BBC correspondent based in Berlin. I covered Germany, but I used to live here in Georgia. I covered the South Caucasus for a few years, and before that I was based in the Baltics. I have a great interest in Central and Eastern Europe and European and EU affairs in general. And today we're going to spend the next hour and a quarter, maybe a little bit more, we have some leeway, but about the next hour and a quarter, hour and a half, talking about a couple of the themes that are really important to the whole of the EU. So many European countries are struggling with rising populism, which in the EU terms is generally defined as Eurosceptic populism. There's also, obviously as people know, the country I come from has just done one of the most populistic things ever, some people would say, and has voted to leave the EU. That's the opinion of many people. The country where I now live, Germany, has for the first time a Eurosceptic populist party in the parliament, the AfD. Now Germany, you have to remember, is, as we know, one of the most pro-European, pro-EU countries in the EU. So that's big news for Germany. And even in France, you know, we're all very happy about Macron, or those of us who like the EU are very welcome Macron's win, but the Front National hasn't gone away. You know, the FN are waiting in the wings to see what might happen if Macron does not get the support from countries like Germany that he might want. So, the rise of anti-EU populism, Eurosceptic populism, populism in all shapes and forms. Added to that, a lot of countries feel threatened by anti-Western, anti-EU propaganda, whether it be from traditional pro-Kremlin or Kremlin-backed TV stations or social media, less traditional forms. So we're going to focus on those two aims over the next hour and a quarter. We're going to look at populism and propaganda. Now, to do that, I have some very good guests from across the European Union, across Europe, who can talk about this. Tina Acketoft. Where's Tina? Tina, thank you very much, is a Swedish MP. She is with the Liberals, that she describes as Sweden's most pro-EU party. She's also the party's spokesman for European Union affairs. She's also keen on martial arts. So, Tina, you might counter propaganda by potentially challenging Putin to a judo match. How would you get on?
I understand that he's quite into judo as well, but then having said that about Putin, he's quite the best of everything, isn't he? So you never know.
Yeah, you could still challenge, see how you get on. Yeah, exactly. Sophie Katsarava chairs the Foreign Relations Committee here in Georgia, the Georgian Parliament. She's also an MP with Georgian Dream. I know her from her more than a decade working with the British Embassy here in Tbilisi, so I would pester her for my new British passport. So she has British background as well, so, you know, she's been following Brexit. She probably will have a few things to say about populism there. Thank you for joining us, Sophie. Nenad Čanak is a Serbian MP and chairman of Serbia's European Integration Committee. He's also an anti-war activist and was an opposition leader when Slobodan Milosevic's regime was overthrown in 2000. If that wasn't enough, he's also been on Big Brother. And I've also been told that you're quite known for your cooking skills. What are your thoughts of Georgian food?
Well, I'm not fat because of a hormonal mixed function, but because I like to eat. Yeah.
Fair enough. Unlike to cook, which is the most important. Yeah. Vesel Memedi, far end, is an MP from Macedonia. Vesel also... let me check, I've just got your details here, Vesel. You're deputy chair of the Committee of European Affairs, and I've also heard that you're proficient in 7 languages, which I think even in this multilingual crowd deserves some sort of an award. And you also have your British connection because you went to university in Leeds. So, you know, you obviously have your, maybe a few things to say on Brexit. But we're not going to just talk about Brexit, I promise you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And my final panelist is Rūta Miliūtė, is a Lithuanian MP. She's on Lithuania's Committee on Foreign Affairs, on European affairs to be more precise. You don't have a British connection, but she spent part of her studies in Turkey, where obviously there is something going on there with populism and propaganda, so you might have one or two things to say about that. So, I'd like now to go to our panelists and start with your thoughts on the rise of Eurosceptic populism, the impact of anti-EU propaganda, and then we'll open the floor to the audience for questions and a discussion. Tina, I'd like to start with you. From the experience of Sweden.
Well, from the experience of Sweden, by the way, I also have a British connection. I used to study and work in London for quite a few years, and that was actually when UK were members, you still are, of the European Union, but Sweden weren't. And now it's the other way around, which makes me really, really upset about the whole, talk about populism. Talking about populism from a Swedish agenda, I come from the southern part of Sweden, where we tend to adapt to everything quicker than further north up, which meant that already in 1998, we saw the first raising of a nationalistic party, the Swedish Democrats. It took for 2 more turns until they actually reached for the parliament in Sweden. And I would say that those 8 years have been a landslide when it comes to populism, when it comes to the simple truths, when it comes to the quick reactions, and when it also comes to ourselves as ordinary politicians, I would say, who used to be the ones with a long speech, to make the long speeches and to want to think about things, yet another turn around. It's taken us about 12 years now to try and find a way of a solution of how are we to tackle this kind of new tempo that the politics has taken, but also to be able to answer questions, difficult questions, not in a simplistic way, but still keeping all the concerns that people might have, but trying to translate them into more easily adoptable truths or suggestions. I keep saying when I go back home, the fact that we have about 15% of people in Sweden who would like to vote for for this nationalistic party, I'm not blaming the people voting. I'm blaming myself and the other parties for not being able to be a better alternative, to present a better politics that actually people can understand and very easily understand and actually makes a better future for them. I would say still, compared to many other countries, I still say that Sweden is not bad off when it comes to the really bad, ugly debates that's going on. It's still a bit more refined, and I'm not sure if that's good or bad, really, because it doesn't mean that we are by any means better than the ugly debate that's going on, but it's not just more hidden. And that's what I tend to see now whenever going into flashback and so on. I hear how many people probably are reacting when they don't think that anybody listens, when they can act and not have to sign off what they are saying in a proper way. And I think that that's where we, as politicians, now have to go into to try and actually go into those forums that I hate and despite, but I still need to go in there to be able again to present, and I think we all have to do that as politicians in Sweden, or opinion makers, you don't have to be a politician, to try and go into these hidden discussions and explain how our solution to those questions, how it looks.
So you're saying that you as a politician also feel responsible for this rise of populism as a mainstream politician.
Yeah.
And what have you done wrong and how would you rectify it in your advice to, everyone in the media as well, really, everyone in this sort of political elite?
Well, I think we were too slow to react to start off with. I live very close to Denmark. Denmark took a totally different approach. Immediately as they saw this rising, they started targeting it. And in Sweden, we kind of sat on our high horses and said, well, that's Danish, you know what Danish are like, and we would never do it like this. Instead, we didn't do anything, so we kind of just pushed everything under the table. We said, well, there are no problems here. And that might be so. If you just congregate with your own people, it might be like that. But immediately as you step out of your own living room, out of your own comfort zone, you will hear all those discussions. And if I'm as a politician, and as a liberal politician, if I'm not there, who can answer their questions? Of course, they are just reinforcing their own visions, their own statements the whole time. So we need to get much more engaged. I don't have to speak to my liberal constituency. They will already vote for liberalism. They will vote for me, hopefully, or for my colleagues. I need to go into areas where they've never seen a liberal before. And perhaps they've never seen a woman politician before. That's where I need to be. And I need to be able to speak in a way that relates to people's hearts first and then to their minds. Liberals in Sweden, at least, we tend to go the other way around. We try to, first we have all these nice, we've read all the books and we've written all the papers and whatever, and then we started thinking, gee, what's in it for you? I think we need to go about it. I come from advertising to start off with, and that's exactly the way you do it. First you do all your reading, you do all your homework, and then you formulate your message, what's in it for you.
But thinking about Britain and Brexit, isn't that what the Conservative Party did? Didn't they say, we need to listen to people who vote UKIP? Then they held the referendum, and now it's the voice of the people. So is that not the danger?
It's very, very dangerous if you don't know what your goal is, and evidently they didn't. The day after Brexit, everybody left. He said, I didn't do this. Yes, you did. Sorry, you campaigned. You had this. So they never had... In martial arts, I used to do taekwondo. You always, when you step into a game, you always have to know what's step number 2, 3, 4, and 5 in order for you to gain the points. You can't just jump into it, you will be knocked out immediately. And that's what, if you go into this, you have to have set your own agenda. Okay, what's the goal? Where do you want to go? Okay, and then you find your way there.
So you have to appeal to emotions, but not lose your way.
Exactly, not lose your brains.
Right. Sophie, so in the Georgian context, thinking about EU accession, which is, one of the main points of today and tomorrow's talks, how do those comments from Tina sort of chime with your thoughts on Georgia?
Well, to start with, there are so many of us on this panel with British background that I thought that there was a temptation to solely focus on Brexit, but this is not the case. But definitely, it fits in the context of the subject that we are discussing at this panel. And secondly, welcome you all again. We are really, really pleased as one of the hosts in this parliament to see you all here and discussing really interesting issues and meaningfully discuss these issues. Propaganda, disinformation, and that is also quite close to Georgia, but not being the exception, Georgia not being the exception to have this kind of impact. To give you a bit of background, which I'm sure you are aware of, but I still think that I should point this out, that in Georgia context, we are in a good position, given that 70–80% of our population supports our foreign policy. And foreign policy is actually one of the policies that is being hit by the propaganda machine, solely because that does not fit in with Russia interests. Despite that, as I said, fortunately, we are lucky enough, and it's not taken for granted, obviously, we are putting a lot of effort in that to ensure that the process of our integration in the EU and NATO is consistent, and that is largely due to the today very often used terminology, strategic communication that we are pursuing in this country, along with our partners from Europe and from the United States, because everybody realizes that this is actually countering propaganda is something to tackle through strategic communication rather than propaganda. So these are the issues that we are dealing these days, but from our perspective, I think we have a good realization and acknowledgement of how Russia propaganda machine works. And that's probably our reaction to that, and that's probably is the result why at the moment we do have such a high, I would say quite surprisingly high compared to other even European countries, high result, a high support of our public towards our foreign policy aspirations. But having said that, this does not mean that we do not have challenges. There are challenges out there, particularly if we look at our recent developments when it comes to our Euro-Atlantic integration. We just recently had a indeed historic decision made about visa liberalization, and that was something tangible that our population felt from the EU, and that's great and that's fantastic. However, there are some, how to say, vulnerable groups in this country who might see, and it's interesting that you use that word because I also had this in my notes, you would often hear from some groups, what's in it for me? And these are the people which are often being vulnerable and exposed to this kind of propaganda. Yes, this is our kind of policy, and majority understands and majority feels why this is important. However, there are groups who, A, question what's in it for me and why should I care about that, and B, they fear, because again of the proactive propaganda, that there is more threat in our foreign policy aspirations, such as national identity, etc., than benefits. But fortunately, this is a very small group. Surprisingly, maybe, for some of you, because every time we do have these discussions with our partners in different formats, I always see surprised looks when we say that, yes, our support, public support, is over 70% towards the EU and NATO. But what I would like to stress is that looking forward, we already know what the context is in Georgia, in the West. We do theoretically what it all means, and we know what the challenges are. Probably now we should be thinking more about the solutions rather than now and again discussing, which is very important, discussing the context. That is the reality. For me and for Georgia, the way I look how we should be proceeding to counter this propaganda is through consistency. Consistency is very important, and this is something that we have learned from our experience. Consistency when you're crafting your narrative. And I think this is what we have managed. And that is kind of the outcome of the support that we are enjoying these days. The way we have crafted the narrative about our foreign policy, we are not raising anybody's expectations, we are being realistic, and we are talking about benefits, obviously, but when there are challenges, we are not turning a blind eye to the challenges. And like you said, particularly from the parliamentary perspective, we are out and about, particularly with those groups who do have questions about it and who question what's in it about me and what are the threats that are coming from the West. And this is, I think, very important, and from the parliamentary, and it's not just parliament actually, from everybody's side, that we should be more proactively delivering the message, and not just message, but at the same time delivering the action which backs up the message, and that is continue to consolidate democracy, which has got huge support in this public, and continue to strengthen economy. And this is the way how we see our further integration in the EU and NATO.
So when you talk about propaganda, what do you mean in concrete terms? What sort of things does Georgia see at the moment?
Well, again, I've mentioned it briefly, but you would have things like threats coming from the West and hitting the national identity and losing the identity if Georgia becomes the member of...
no, but what I mean is, how is this propaganda spread? And who's behind it?
Yeah,
so basic, concrete, what is it? And where is it coming from?
That is, I mean, social media, one of the sources. Could be some TV channels as well. But social media mostly, I think, is the source of that information. But I do not see it as something very dramatic, to be honest.
Because when you look at other countries, the impact is actually quite low, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know,
and unless you allow these people to let the steam out and to throw out questions, and then when you get the answers, which are based on arguments, that is not that tragic and dramatic to me, because, you know, this is I can't say that that's a normal debate, because I do not want in our society to be debating about black and white. For me, it's clearly black, and for this is the white side. However, if somebody has got concerns and can be influenced by this propaganda, that's where we are, the whole society, including MPs. That's how I see also my role, to counter this propaganda through the arguments and through the actions that we show to these people. So what I would like to say is that obviously I'm not suggesting at all that it's good that social media might be a platform for this kind of discussions, but sometimes this information is also not information, but the fact itself is sometimes blown out of all proportions, that, you know, something dramatic is happening. We shouldn't let it happen in that way, that we just leave it unnoticed, turn a blind eye to this, and, you know, as if nothing is happening there. We need to be proactively and consistently delivering the message which we believe is right.
But if propaganda is not, say, on these sort of messages on social media, if it's not having a massive impact, which studies show it actually doesn't sway people's opinions, that does take away one excuse for the Georgian government about why there is populism, or why people are nervous about the EU, or why, you know, okay, the acceptance towards the EU is over 70%, but as we heard earlier, it used to be over 80%.
Yep.
And so we can't ignore the problems for, say, poorer or rural voters who are dissatisfied. And it's not coming from propaganda, is it? It's not coming from the Kremlin. It's also coming from, they're not happy with Tbilisi. So how do you deal with that, if we put propaganda aside for one minute?
If we leave propaganda aside, that if there are, again, I may have the same answer to that. If there are people who are concerned about certain issues, leaving aside propaganda, the best remedy to that is to prove to this segment and to this group of people that through not just rhetoric, obviously, because rhetoric needs to be backed, as I said earlier, backed with the actions, and action is
social welfare reforms.
So exactly, reforms, not just on the democratic side, that we are doing very well, I should say, but at the same time, economic reforms that everybody feels the benefits in their daily life as such. I mean, that is coming, but I mean, these issues are everywhere. Again, it's not just Georgia which has to deal with this kind of
but you're in the Georgian
challenges.
So I need to hold you to account.
Definitely, and I accept that we are now talking about Georgia, but I would give you probably the same answer, that consistency is very important, reform process is very important, so that these people understand what the government's agenda is, and I think that is we are being quite consistent in terms of what we are offering to our public. So that's you're right. It's not necessarily linked with propaganda. Propaganda has got its issues, but there are other concerns that people might have, and we have to tackle it through not tackle necessarily, but cope with the same attitude as we would normally cope with other challenges when it comes to convincing the public that this is right and this is what we are doing.
So anti-Western propaganda might not cause populism, but it might exacerbate it. And actually the cause of populism are concrete problems in society, possibly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Very interesting, Sophie. Rūta, now to you. So Lithuania has some experience of anti-Western propaganda, I think, from over the border.
Yes, having neighbor in the east with clear geopolitical interest in the Baltic states let us speak a lot about Russian soft power and hard power as well. And we are facing a lot of different threats, and starting from a huge military exercise, Zapad 2017, which was next to our border. During it, Russian and Belarusian troops were exercising how to cut the Baltic states from the rest of the Europe in case of military action. And we also have huge neighbor Belarus, which is, we can say, very dependent from Russia, and a nuclear power plant, Ostrowiec, being built just 40 kilometers away from our capital Vilnius, which also shows Russia's strategic interest. Nevertheless, we experience a lot of information threats. And there are many ways how soft power can be implemented, and starting from propaganda, newspapers, propagandic journalists, and there are so many ways how we are feeling the threat. And I think that Russia is interested to convey such aggressive foreign policy to wield the attention from its own society, from its own inner problems, and also to have the countries closer to itself. So living in the Baltic states, we face a lot of different threats from cybersecurity issues as well, and most of the attacks that we experience are being related with the Russian intelligence services. So we can definitely share a lot of experience.
And Lithuania's actually come out with some quite concrete measures to tackle, because you had concrete situations where there's been anti-NATO propaganda spread, and then you've set up some government institutes and some actual research projects, haven't you, and some concrete measures. Tell us something about those measures to counter those specific, the particular anti-NATO propaganda for the troops there.
Lithuanians' security depends a lot from NATO, and definitely Russia is trying to create a conflict in the society when talking about NATO troops employment. And we had a few incidents where fake news were released about the newly deployed troops in Lithuania, and we have a strategic communication center in the Ministry of Defense, which works very actively and tries to explain to the society what is actually happening, because we believe that building resilience is very important. This is how you also increase the media literacy of the people, to help them to choose which media sources are reliable and which are not. And the more people are speaking foreign languages and the more sources they can choose, not only the Russian ones, the better information they get. But also we have these kind of web pages as Bolt News or Sputnik, which are also in Lithuanian language. So it gets harder and harder to actually realize which media source is trustable and which is not. So we believe that building resilience and media literacy, raising media literacy are important tools.
And how have you been doing that in concrete terms in Lithuania?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the Strategic Communication Center is working.
But what are you doing concretely, sort of, so people can understand? Because Lithuania's actually pushed forward some quite interesting measures to counteract this particular propaganda which the Baltic states are suffering.
I think one of the most interesting things is that so-called internet elves, it's like a society in the social media, on the internet, who are trying to counter the Russian trolls who are spreading this disinformation and propaganda on the internet. So I'm glad to say that the society is being brought together by this mission and called the internet elves, and this is something that could definitely be useful in other countries as well.
And that's civil society also involved in that? It's not just government operations?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And how effective has that been?
Well, so far I think that we managed to cope with the disinformation that was spread, and I think it's pretty effective, because before the media takes a message and escalates it, they definitely try to first contact with the Strategic Communication Center, for example, and to give some time to figure out what is actually happening.
Good, thank you. It's very interesting. Vesel, I'll come over to you on the end. I feel like you're looking a bit lonely over there. So what about your experience then of the role in Macedonia, for example, the role of populism is a different one, isn't it, really, to other Western countries, for example? Tell us a bit more about how populism manifests itself in the Balkan region, the West Balkans.
Thank you. Dear panelists, dear members of European Parliament, dear guests, It's an honor and pleasure being here. This is my first time coming in Georgia. I hope it won't be the last. Although Macedonia and Georgia does not have any bilateral relationship, maybe you will provoke us so that we can start and have a real, concrete bilateral relationship. With regard to, it was mentioned earlier that this European Union is some kind of best historical peace project that today is facing many challenges. And one of those challenges that this peace project is facing is the challenge of anti-Western propaganda. Macedonia, Georgia, as well as many other countries in the west, in the east, in the south, in the north, are faced with the greatest challenge ever, and that is disinformation. Information war, or in fact disinformation war, and next generation propaganda are among the most important challenges facing the world today. They manifest themselves in different forms and in different places. The challenges are far different from those of the Cold War. Having in mind the globalization of information, media and messages that move easily across borders and into smartphones. Today, for many scholars and experts in this field, there is no doubt that the origin of disinformation comes from former Soviet Union. And regardless that this union does not exist anymore, the consequences of this challenge are felt even today in many places around the world. The damage has been done a long time ago, but we still continue, even today, to pay the price of that damage. In fact, today, the price is being paid even by the very countries that were direct successors of former Soviet Union, regardless that many countries outside of the Union do not see this. There is no silver bullet available to solve this problem, and the answers will not be the same in every European country. A combination of actions by governments, NGOs, concerned citizens, and journalists will be needed in order to fashion a response that neither promotes censorship nor hampers intellectual freedom. A range of policies will be required in order to help people get access to an accurate and balanced understanding of the world. Without better information, democracy will quickly become difficult, if not impossible, all across the Western world. It's my belief, however, that we are wasting a lot of time on directing a blame to one nation, but we forget our own yards. So the faster we are apart from finding a scapegoat for this world problem, the faster we'll be able to protect the democratic values that we aspire for. We all have to look inside our own countries and try our best to identify the centers, organizations, groups, individuals that have been successful in manipulating society with anti-Western propaganda solely in order to advance their own agenda as a disguise or a mask in the name of certain values that are highly valuable for a particular society. It's my belief that the only solution to this problem is every country to start telling the truth, to reveal to the public, the masters, centers, organizations, groups, individuals that for a long time have disguised themselves and were hidden under the banner of democracy and what Western values stand for, but all the time have attacked as if the West is against their way of living so they can hide better their own underground actions. Any direct attack towards those who promote anti-Western propaganda will make them even more powerful and hence will not result in any success. The only thing that needs to be done is to uncover the masks of these people in order for society to see on their own the real face of these groups of people. If society does not believe and change their attitude about these people, there is no other method or technique that can be successful in dealing with this world problem. Therefore, Macedonia has started to do its job in revealing the real face of certain centers, organizations, groups, or individuals that for quite some time have used propaganda in advancing their own agenda. Such a disinformation has not been good at all for the state and surely has moved us away even more from EU. The institutions of the country have started to reveal the truth for everybody that has used or rather misused the sublime values of any society in advancing the obscure agendas that are against democratic values as a whole. However, in order to have success, to get a clear date for accession to the EU, it must not fall into a trap of disguising themselves in the name of fighting these groups at the expense of real major reforms of many institutions and fight against crime and corruption. I would like to add here that Macedonia recently is doing a pretty good job in revealing these people and these organizations that in a way for a long time had this mask as if they are all the time promoting democratic values and Western values, but in fact all the time they were advancing their own agendas. And we have to deal with this, and Macedonia has done a pretty good job, and during this month, is going to do another good job in passing a lot of laws in Parliament, especially with regard to the Agency of Security and Counterintelligence, the reforms of judiciary, the reforms that the Parliament need to pass. At the same time, Macedonia, just in the last 6 months that we have a new government now in Macedonia, is doing a tremendous good job with regard to signing a historic agreement, I would say, with Bulgaria, with Mr. Zoran Zaev and Borisov, that they have signed an agreement, and I think that in Bulgarian parliament has already been ratified, and I think that during this month in Macedonia will be ratified the same agreement of good friendly relationship and cooperation with all its neighbors. I think that the Foreign Ministry of Macedonia, in a way, has applied the famous policy of zero problems with neighbors that was used a long time ago as an academician by Ahmet Davutoğlu. And I think that we have to do a better job with regard to Greece. Greece has to show, again, a certain compromise with the issue of the name. And I think that so far we are doing a good job, not only in doing our homework inside our own country, but at the same time to try to reveal the real faces of these centers and organizations that I was talking about, because they are really present not only in Macedonia, but they are really present in Western Balkans in general. And if EU and other countries do not support us in revealing the real face of these people so that society can see and touch and believe, then it's really difficult to fight this anti-Western propaganda. Because if we try by direct attacks, whether you use social network against all these people, you cannot fight them. The only way...
Can I just ask, sorry,
Sure.
I have a very concrete question for you though, Vesel.
Sure.
When you say reveal the mask of these people, which people are you talking about? Who are they?
I'm talking about the underground.
And as in what? Who is this underground?
Underground are, I would say, oligarchs. Underground are everybody because they want to advance their own interests. And in the Western Balkans, they have been quite successful so far, I would say, since the independence of Macedonia. So it has been 26 years.
So you're talking about people domestically in the region,
Absolutely,
who are not ideologically driven necessarily, but have maybe financial interests or political interests.
Plus ideologically, I would say. So
Right.
you see, when you tolerate such a problem, not only domestically, but even outside Western Balkans, then you will have to pay the price for that. And I think that Western Balkans right now is at this, I would say, edge with regard to once and for all dealing with these groups and these undergrounds. And if we don't have the help of EU, what was said earlier, better to export stability in Western Balkans than to import instability in Europe. And that's exactly what is happening, because I would say that the border between West and East is in Macedonia in a way. So in a way, we have together to work and once and for all reveal the faces, the real faces of these groups, that be that ideologically or for financial reasons, they are damaging not only Macedonia, they are damaging the Western values in general, I would say.
Well, that's very interesting, because it's building on what Rūta was saying, but whereas Lithuania is battling this sort of anti-Western propaganda from the other side of the border, you're doing it from within your own borders, right, effectively, aren't you? Right. So it's the same problem from a different place. Thank you. Nenad, so from Serbia's experience, what's your experience, or what can you tell us about the experience of anti-Western propaganda and populism?
From Serbia point of view, where can I start? Point is very simple. After all things happened in the Western Balkans the last 30 years, let's say, Serbia today is with the one entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina called Republika Srpska, are only possible strongholds of Russian imperial influence in Balkans. And point is that this very moment you have, for example, one paradoxical situation that in the third biggest town in Serbia called Niš, there is some humanitarian center, Russian humanitarian center. Okay, humanitarian centers are a nice thing, but I really don't understand why people who are employed in that humanitarian center should have diplomatic immunity, and why that humanitarian center should have a diplomatic status, meaning exterritorial position. That means that no customs, no any checkings from Serbian government cannot take place there. Their staff cannot be prosecuted by the law of Serbia, and so on and so forth. So that is very peculiar, because in that case, every employee of a Red Cross institution, for example, all over the world, should have a diplomatic status, and that is not an issue, as we all know. That is just one small question, small issue. But if you want a wider picture, you can recognize it through the fact that you have more and more influence in media of directly Russian state opinions and Russian state positions, which they want to implement in a way of thinking of the citizens of Serbia.
Is it effective?
Well, how effective is, you can find out through a simple example. For example, when politicians are talking about each other, say you are a Russian, you are a American spy, and you are, I don't know, a British spy, that is also very popular, or you are a German spy or something. But nobody ever said for someone that he's a Russian spy. You simply cannot be a Russian spy. Because you can, Russian is, you know, that is not a foreign, if you know what I want to say. You are working for a domestic service which will come, if you know what I want to say. So that is very difficult. You have splittings inside of Serbian society where some part of Serbian society understands that Serbia don't have what to ask for from that kind of oligarchy as this very moment is main political force in Russia. But from the other side, for example, Russia gave donations to Serbia in last years, approximately 87 million euros. In the same time, European Union donated 3 billion euros. But still, when you ask someone at the street who is the biggest contributor to Serbian economy and so on and so forth, they'll say Russia. Russians are, you know, our brothers and friends. Well, European Union and NATO gave their contribution to that opinion. After air raids which took place in Serbia and Montenegro in 1999, it's you know, everyday thing that ultra-rights extremists are saying how we can be part of NATO when they bombed us. So that is their argument. From the other side, I'm just looking till my estimated colleagues were talking. I just took a look of these flags here. I didn't saw one single flag of one single founder of European Union, because there was Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. And there is no one single flag of these 6 countries. How come? Well, it's very simple, because here in this hall are people who are in a problem. They're not in a problem, we are in a problem. And they don't give a damn about that. And that is a little bit problem. I'll explain.
I think a few people in France and Germany might disagree with that.
I'll give you more examples. Because nobody okay, forget these 6. Let's talk about our neighbors from Croatia. They are members of the European Union. But I'll appreciate very much to have now someone from Croatia Parliament, Sabor, to ask him about uprise of glorification of Ustashi movement during World War II, which were directly Nazi movement which did the Holocaust inside of Croatia. I'd like very much to have some friends from Slovenian parliament to ask them about behavior toward Romas in Slovenia, where they are kicking out all families of Romas and they don't have where to live now. They're kicking them out from their homes. I'd like to have friends from Spain, a Spanish parliament, to tell me how can I defend European Union in front of those ones who say, yes, but in Spain you have political prisoners which cannot be released before elections, which will take place on 21st of December, under no bail. 4 of them under no bail cannot be released. And they're in a jail without persecution. So, what can I say to my friends when they are, if they are from Hungarian parliament, about existence of anti-migrant policy and barbed wires and fences on a border with my country. My country is Serbia. My province, where I'm coming from, is Vojvodina, which is bordering to Hungary. where tens of thousands of Hungarians flee 1956 in front of Soviet invasion. And now there is fence on that very place.
So is your point then, just to clarify, is your point that populism, however you want to define it, is not necessarily just an anti-EU thing? You could be in the EU and still be doing objectionable things.
It is in EU, and EU do not have any mechanism to fight against it.
But isn't that a different issue? There you're talking about the problem once you're, countries like Georgia do a tremendous lot, whereas countries, like Poland, some would say, would not get in right now doing what they're doing. So, there is an issue there, but is that not a different issue to populism and propaganda? Is there a connection, or is that a different issue? I just don't want to stray on to a completely different topic, which is an important topic and a big one, but what's the connection to populism?
Propaganda is a set of unfair commercials. Let's put it that way. When we are talking about populism, populism is unfair use of combination of what people want to hear and a bunch of lies. Put that together and you'll have a populism. Populism is very simple. You can never achieve even close how much populists can lie, that they'll achieve. We faced that a lot of times, unfortunately, in Serbia. And we had a lot of problems to remove Slobodan Milošević and his dictatorship in the year 2000. But now, we are facing all those things all around us. These populists to whom they are just pointing who is guilty because of what. Not what to do to prevail, but who is guilty.
So I think that's a very good moment to open it up, because actually that's what we should have started off doing, is defining what is populism, what is propaganda. So that's a nice summary there, I think, which I think, would you guys agree with that? Would you agree with those definitions, or would you have other definitions to add on there or disagree with?
No, I agree. It's just one thing I'd like to say. We make it very complicated sometimes. And I think what you're doing in Lithuania and what Estonia is doing when it comes to combating propaganda is very, very good. And we're trying to do the same things in Sweden. But in the end, it all comes about politicians, national politicians, being very naive as well. Take, for example, Sweden now. We signed the Memorandum of Understanding between Sweden and NATO. All of a sudden, bang, all politicians were immediately approached by the truth. And some of the politicians don't even bother going back to the source and seeing where it comes from. So all of a sudden, the plague would be the next after what was happening after we had signed this. And they are so naive, so they don't even bother to go and search for the source. That's one thing. I also was a member of the Council of Europe for 8 years, Parliamentary Assembly, where all European countries, but Belarus are members. And to see how the Russian delegation worked, all the national delegations, irrespective of which party grouping you were part of, how they worked and how they managed to get country out of country to stand up for their own rights in their own nation. So they just split the whole Council of Europe, I would say. And that's also politicians being naive and being afraid. So I think that all the technical stuff that you're doing, that's great, but in the end, it's just each and every one of us who can make the difference. So that's what we have to do.
Yes.
One objection. I'll give you one example. My friend, personal friend, and we are from the same party. His name is Bojan Kostreš. Bojan Kostreš. He used to be a member of Serbian parliament and a member of delegation which had a meeting in Moscow, parliamentarian meeting of delegations and so on, I don't know, something. And there was some resolution where his voice, his signature should make a difference of how text will sound. is it right or it is not right to occupy bordering countries? And then one official from a Russian delegation came to him and said, we are expecting of Serbia to support us. And my friend Bojan Koster said, I don't know about Serbia, but I will not support you. And Russian official again said, but we are expecting you to. Bojan said no, and he didn't say that, and it was in that second version of resolution where it's condemned any invasion on a sovereign state and so on and so forth. That was because of Ukraine, that was because of Georgia, and so on and so on. When he went to airport, he was arrested. His passport were took away. Excuse me, my English is, picked up on the streets of Europe. So, whenever I hear this beautiful English with a British accent, I'm feeling stupid.
My Serbo-Croat's not great.
Yeah, but Serbo-Croats never had the half of a planet. Never mind. Anyway, point is that they took away his passport, and it's prohibited for him to enter Russian Federation for 3 years. So he was official, a member of official delegation of a Serbian parliament, and because he voted according his conscience, it was enough for them to simply ban his entry into Russian Federation. So I don't think that is the pattern for democracy and human rights and freedom of speech or something like that. And that is the reason why I simply think that any oligarchy and any system organized as Russia is organized today must be closely watched and carefully, with a great care, think what to do with all that. Russia is a great power, and that is not giving them a right to give lessons to everybody else how to live. That is what we learned, not in a hard way like some others, but not in an easy way as well. This very moment we are dependent from crude oil and natural gas from Russia. And if European Union want really to do something, let's help to those who are addicted to raw materials from Russia to diminish that addiction and to gain economic freedom. And that is the real way out. All these things where we are talking about, political process or this or that, or I don't know, chapter 938, that's nice, but that is wasting of time. Because in Brussels, bureaucrats don't see what is the really problem.
So again, it's going back to the concrete measures which politicians can and civil society can push for.
Very simple. I think that Brexit is a consequence of a lack of hygiene, if you know what I want to say.
Political hygiene.
Political hygiene, because that is, like getting, like contracting STD in a public toilet. That is that kind of lack of hygiene, if you know, with the little engagement of NGOs and people of goodwill. I think that Brexit will not happen. This way, it will open issue of Scotland, it will open issue of Northern Ireland, it will open a lot of issues. It will, as well as, I don't know.
Well, I'm going to stop you there, because if we go down the Brexit route, we'll be here all night. But I will use STD in a public toilet in my next BBC report.
Contracting STD in a public toilet. That is, yeah.
I like that metaphor.
Don't blush. Don't blush. It's okay.
I'm going to open it up to the floor to move away from this metaphor. Oyas Kalnic from Latvia. We have a mic for Oyas, please.
This one, thank you. I want to offer another definition for populism, and that is offering simple answers to complex questions. And I want to raise that in terms of referendum, the validity of referendums in this day and age, which we've always looked upon as a mainstay of democracy. But in the information age, information warfare age, with social media, Facebook and Twitter, you can manipulate public opinion so easily. Like Tina, I also used to work in advertising, and the basic of an ad is a headline and a picture. The average person doesn't want to go beyond that because they don't have the time or the patience to read. And Facebook, in the creation of memes, you get an instant message just with a picture and a headline. It could be totally fake news, it could be propaganda, it could be disinformation, but it expands exponentially within minutes, and when we see that. And I think you mentioned earlier that the surveys show people don't believe propaganda, but what if they don't know it's propaganda? And I think the referendums we've had this year, even the Brexit vote, the Dutch referendum on the Ukrainian Association Agreement, and now in the U.S. they're beginning to investigate the impact of Facebook and Twitter on the U.S. election. And it just strikes me that, like Tina brought up, that in part politicians are to blame for not explaining things well enough. Well, the successful politicians are the ones who simplify and lie, and they're the ones who are getting through because they realize the average voter does not have maybe the education or the intelligence. How do we combat that? Doesn't it come down to educating the voters and finding a better way to reach them, not through traditional means? And we unfortunately have to use the same means that the propagandists. And the propaganda isn't all from the outside. In the UK, weren't there basically two lies that basically got everybody going? The migration issue, and what is it, 250 million that the country would get back on health care. And the moment people believe that, it goes. So that's what we're battling.
Yeah, good.
Thank you. I just would like to follow up
also
on the
from
point.
Latvia. Would you like to introduce yourself? I've forgotten your name.
Yes, my name is Miliūtė Sigāne. I'm also from the Latvian Parliament, chair of the European Affairs Committee. I would like to follow up on the point that Mr. Čanak made, very well made and strong point. But I would like to follow up on the point that you stated that Russia is strong and we have to maybe not respect it, but this is something that we have to live with, basically. I would like to dispute it because I believe that Russia is extremely weak. And for the fact that it is so weak, it actually needs to use propaganda, manipulation tools, and to humiliate others. And its weakness actually is frightening because this is a big question: what's going to happen to this huge, vast country if it continues to be weak? So I would like you to talk to this. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, isn't it? Because that's been the debate. The more we talk about, this idea about Putin being the puppet master from the Kremlin directing all this thing, which is a false notion anyway, but it gives the Kremlin more power than it actually has. Sophie or Rūta.
Just today we heard that British MI6 announced that Russia is tier 1 threat because after they counted how much personnel there is working for the institutions, it's hard to outnumber it. And I don't think that we have to outnumber it by the people who is working, but more by cooperation. And absolutely, yes, when you say that we are talking about Russia and giving it more credit than it actually has, we make it sound more powerful than it might be in fact. And I think we should focus more about positive notes within the Europe, and focusing about investing into reforms, into hearing out more people, and not because talking about Brexit, it was also mentioned something about being a bit blind for what is happening in the streets, so about what people are talking about, and working with the matters that politicians think are important. So focusing more about what is happening inside of our countries would definitely help to build the resilience rather than giving more credit to our eastern neighbor.
Mm-hmm. Put your hand up if you do want questions or comments. I'll go very quickly to Sophie, and then we'll go to the floor again. I'll come back to you guys in a minute if that's all right. Sophie, yes.
Because I wanted to make exactly the same point. In a way, we heard two radically different points. Russia is strong and Russia is weak. But to be honest, in this context, I don't think that it really matters whether Russia is strong or whether Russia is weak. We get the result, what the result we get in terms of propaganda. So whether it's strong or whether it's weak, we should be the ones who should be protecting ourselves from weak Russia or from strong Russia. And I want to follow up exactly on that point, that we have to make our societies resilient and not being vulnerable to weak or strong Russia. And for that, I will go back to the point that we need to strengthen our societies. We need to continue to the reform process that we have. Talking about Georgia, obviously, I can say the same about other countries, but it is in our societies, in that case, that we have to try to find the strengths and to be resilient and not vulnerable to the extent that some countries might be vulnerable to strong or weak Russia.
Interesting, thank you. Claire Moody, MEP from the European Parliament. Another Brit, the other one in the room.
There we go. Yeah, and I too will not lose the image of Brexit being an STD for some time, and I'll use that in a lot of meetings, I suspect. I'm going to preface my comments by saying I agree with Sophie and Tina around the responsibility of politicians, around both the clarity of message and the hearts and minds point, and that there's a lot to be made about political honesty and political leadership in all of this debate as well. But picking up on points that have been made, I've got a couple of questions. One is around, are you doing anything about political education or education about political systems and about critical thinking in schools and at that age, where, you know, it's the opportunity where we've got actually to teach our young minds that, you know, not everything that's going to come at them is necessarily, you know, the fact that it purports to be. And with critical thinking as well, that kind of comes to the media point too, and recognising the media as a gatekeeper, and you know, both in what it reports and how it reports it. And the second question is around social media, and reference was made to Facebook and Twitter and the investigations that are going on around those. But one thing we learnt from the referendum and subsequently, certainly in the UK, is we've got quite strong electoral regulations, but they just don't, they're not fit to touch this kind of campaigning, and it's not brought into that regulation. So again, are you doing any work on regulation around elections? And I'd avoid referendums if I were you. They're not necessarily a good thing.
Thank you, Claire. Well, Margaret Thatcher, who is no fan of the EU, called them a tool for demagogues. You know, so that kind of says it all. We'll take a question from the gentleman at the back. If you can make it short, that would be brilliant, because I want to take as many as we can. And the gentleman in the white shirt there, and then we'll go back to our panelists.
Thank you.
Did I miss one? Yes, very good. Okay, we'll take those next three. Yes.
Nodar Dangeshvili from a Georgian NGO. I have a question to the panel. the Georgian politicians have good reason to be proud of the...
Sorry, I don't think we can hear you very well. If you want to back away from the microphone.
The Georgian politicians have good reason to be proud of the high support rating for the EU and NATO in Georgia. However, if we look at the example of Macedonia, which is also a very pro-European country, what happened in April in that country when the nationalists stormed the parliament, and according to the intelligence leaks, Russian spies and diplomats were stoking some discord in this country for many years. Do we have enough reasons to feel comfortable in Georgia and calm and self-assured that the rising tide of nationalist parties, which is also the case in Georgia, might not be actually an attempt by Russia to come into Georgia through a Trojan horse?
Okay, thank you. Gentleman in the white shirt, and then downtown.
My name is Oliver Reisner. I'm Jean Monnet Professor in European and Caucasian Studies here at Ilia State University in Tbilisi. We heard in this panel very much about countering anti-Western propaganda, but to my point of view, very little about managing citizens' expectations. Because I think that the issue of Russian propaganda and the populism is only a problem, describing a problem, not a solution. Yeah, so it's very easy to bash Russia for its intervention, but there must be other reasons why it functions. Yeah, because then it is really with very little investment that there is so much impact on it. The problem is, and this is, I think, that needs more to be addressed, that in all European societies, and not only in Europe but also in the US, we have a growth in propaganda and in populism, whether it's the cleavages in society, the fissures in society, the greater they are in the societies. To a lesser degree, there's more social cohesion in the society. So I would like to ask the panel how you are going to address the structural problems that are underlying the opening doors of the propaganda that are addressed here, because it's really about the urban-rural divide, and this is not only in the post-Soviet area, it is really also what you can find in Poland, in Germany. Everywhere we are facing these kind of divides between Trump and Clinton, United States, or peace and citizens' union in Poland, and so on. This is very much really something that is related to the social problems inside the societies. But they use a form that was very common during socialist regimes or communist regimes and so on. Yeah? So the forms maybe continue, but the content is really adapted to a problem of democratic inclusion of major parts in the society.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Final question here.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. So my question or small comment, exactly what our colleague from Serbia said. You know, we can argue, is Russia strong or weak, you know, for the whole day, and we shall not find a clear answer. But I remember very well Vladimir Putin back in 2012. He said that the so-called soft power strategy of Russia will be the most important strategy of their foreign policy. And then Konstantin Kosachev, who was at some time, he was a diplomat, then he was chairman of Foreign Affairs Committee. At that time, he was leading agency, special agency, which was called Россотрудничество, and which was had a mandate exactly to implement this soft power strategy with huge amount of money, like, you know, several $100 million US. He explained what does it mean in the understanding soft power strategy of Russia. He explained in a very simple way. Russia has a problem with pro-Western elite in such countries like Baltic states, you know, Georgia, Serbia, maybe, you know, Western Balkans, and so on and so on. And the strategy which they are going to implement is very simple: to appeal to simple people. That maybe the choice to go to the West is the wrong choice of the elite. And how to do it? To explain in a very simple and for people very well understandable language. Like, Europe is, you know, against family values, Europe is for gays, and so on and so on. So that's what they're doing. The question is very simple, what are we doing? And this is the question not to Serbians or Macedonians or Georgians. The question is, what are we doing on EU level? How we are ready to fight this soft power of Russia? When Europe is devoting, I know that recently from Foreign Affairs Ministers' Council, there was a decision on the budget of the next year to devote 800,000 euros to fight propaganda of Russia, when Russia is spending hundreds of millions. Yeah, I don't know even, yes, 3.5 billion. So my question is very simple. Western community was facing the same problem back in 1947. When Stalin was going to expand his political influence, not only in Central Europe, where he had his army, but also into France, Greece, Italy, and so on, where local communists were going to use that opportunity after the Second World War, that economies were bad, people were dissatisfied, and so on and so on. And what the Western community did, it came out with Marshall Plan. So the only solution which the Western community can do, really, in fighting Russian propaganda, is not to look how to close some Russian TV channels, but how to move with real investment into economies of those countries in order to show the people that really Western community is taking care about their future and is really investing into, I don't know, gas systems or something like that, or roads and so on and so on. So I don't know to whom to put the question, maybe to Sweden, which is old member for you.
Yeah, so Tina, you did have something to say earlier, so I'll go to you first, and then we'll go to the others about the other questions.
About this topic, but I do understand. I'm a keen friend of exchange, and I think that we need to be very strict on the Russian regime, but we need to be very soft on the Russian people. And I think that's probably, it's not an answer to your question, but yeah, I'll have to leave it at that. But I did get a straight question about the election campaigns and media and new media and what EU and what Sweden is doing about that. And actually, we are looking into the legislation when it comes to what you can do and what you can't do on the internet, of course, when it comes to campaigning as well. The problem is, which is not a problem, the problem is that it easily collides with the other freedoms that we so keenly hold close to our heart, which is freedom of speech and freedom of organization and so on, which means that it's very, very difficult to actually to legislate on that specific topic without going into breachment with freedom of speech, for example. But it is being looked into. But what I did want to ask really was the gentleman over there, because he was very much talking about. I think what we have now is we have a divided European Union, even within my own country. Some of the parties in Sweden, they want to go smaller, but more arrow-shaped. They want to be a European Union that doesn't do very much, but what they do very, very well. And I think that's probably what we have been doing already, and it didn't work. That's why I was very happy to be able to allow my government to sign this social pillar, this agreement, because I think that, to me, European Union is all about people, peace and prosperity. And we've mainly been dealing with the prosperity piece, actually. We haven't been dealing with the people bit now. So what we need to do in order to get people to understand where European Union wants to go is actually to make sure that everybody can get a sense of what's in it for me. I get better education, I get a salary, I get a pension, I get a roof over my head, so that more people actually can feel that. And that's why I feel very, very strongly that now is the time for European Union to go broader. Now is the time for us to start answering about the social questions that everybody, actually, that's very close to everybody's heart, but at different levels.
Thank you, Tina. I'll go quickly to Nenad, who has something to say about Facebook, and then Vesel.
About Facebook. Just for your information, Serbia is a country with the biggest number of Facebook users per capita in the world. Serbia. So there is a strong influence of Facebook. And a lot of people in Serbia, majority of people, will say, if you ask them who is a friend of Serbia, they'll say Russia. Where you want your kids to go to school and where do you want them to live in European Union? Well, have you ever heard that aunt from Russia sent somebody a package? No. From EU, yes. From United States, yes. So, simple things. And one more remark, and that is just my humble private opinion. Leaving Nazis to go in a nursery, in a streets, is like, in the name of democracy, is like letting rats enter the nursery in the name of ecology. They are simply not the same thing. You cannot advocate free trade and say legalize heroin. Some things simply don't belong in a civilized society.
Thank you. Vesel.
I'll try short to answer to some of the questions because we had so many
very,
questions.
very quickly, because we've only got literally 2 minutes left.
I know,
so.
sure. Well, by Tina and by our colleague from Latvia, he's not here anymore, he said that politicians are not naive, and Tina said that they are naive, actually, and I would say that they are not naive. They are very smart, and on most occasions they are doing this on purpose. So it's not that they are naive and they are not fighting and they don't know exactly what disinformation means. They know exactly what it means, and they are doing it on purpose for their own agendas. 2, Russia is weak or Russia is strong. I agree absolutely that it doesn't matter, because disinformation is not coming now when Russia is weak. Disinformation was there even in the time of Soviet Union. So let's assume that at that time, I guess many of you know Grigory Potemkin. So 18th century, 19th century, when Grigory Potemkin, governor in Ukraine, I would say, he used this Potemkin village, what we know today, a mobile village, so that in order to impress Katerina I. So since 18th century, this information is there. When you had the Russian Empire at that time. So we are not talking about being weak or strong. Disinformation is there, and we have to know. But it doesn't make any sense if we don't do our job in our own yard to talk about Russia, to talk about United States. We have to talk about our own yard. The ideology is everywhere. And we have people inside our own countries now who are doing the same job that Soviet Union did a long time ago. So what we are doing about these organizations, these centers, these groups, forget about Russia. Russia has thousands of problems. I don't think that, to relate to that question, that can we be comfortable with regard to Georgia, with regard to Macedonia. We know what happened 27th of April in Macedonia when the crowd stormed inside. They almost killed MPs. I was there inside. Why? Because certain nationalists didn't want for a democratic change of government, because you have a new majority now should rule the country, another majority. They didn't allow this. And sure, we had people from counterintelligence from Serbia, maybe from Russia, but again, that doesn't matter much. What it matters is that we have inside our own country spies, regardless whether they are Russian, whether they are British, or it doesn't matter.
Great. I'm going to hand over to Sophie.
Finally,
we'll wrap it.
I think I have to answer
from
this
Claire.
one with regard from Claire, with regard, especially with regard to critical thinking, and do we teach kids and students and stuff like that? I can talk about our experience in Macedonia. And I have complained all the time to diplomatic corps in Macedonia that they have invested billions of dollars and euros in Macedonia to the NGOs for critical thinking, so that to prepare society to join EU.
Right, I'm handing over to Sophie because we're wrapping up now.
They have failed. Sorry.
I think, no, we've got that point. It's a really good one, but I'm handing to Sophie because we need to give Tamar a few minutes to wrap up the whole session before everyone leaves. But that's a really good point, Vesel. Sophie, very quickly.
Follow up on the critical thinking, actually, because I wanted to, more or less other questions were covered, and I wanted to follow up on Claire's question. I will give you a very specific example. Yes, there is education is our priority in this country among many other reforms, but education is indeed one of the priorities. I will tell you one specific example. This morning, as we were sitting here, me and my Estonian colleagues rushed to a school, one of the schools nearby, in a nearby region, to meet school students and to talk about various issues. And I was impressed with their critical thinking, and I was impressed with the level of knowledge that these children had. And why I'm mentioning this? It's a stark contrast to what we had even 5 years ago. People were students, I'm talking about students, were shy, embarrassed, confused to ask some critical questions. 5 years ago. What I'm seeing these days, and I travel as much as I can to meet students, to meet school students, and to see what's their perception of development is, and how they are reacting to all these developments. They are critical, and I welcome this. And yes, this is very important when we are talking about development. Education is number one, and it also touches upon earlier comment, really, that we need to educate voters. Yes, education is very important, and when education is in place, then it's much easier to counter propaganda.
Well, that's right, and that's a nice point to wrap up on, because it's actually the very concrete stuff, isn't it? It's not just what's being tweeted, what's on Facebook, whatever is on the media. It's really what you guys are doing, how we are transmitting the message that you guys are doing, but it's a responsibility for all of us, really, isn't it, to do concrete things to fight populism, and then the propaganda sorts itself out. That seems to be the message of this afternoon. Thank you very much for a great discussion. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you, guys. That was very interesting. Rūta, I'm sorry, I didn't come to you at the end because I thought...
So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, these panel participants of the third panel. We are a little bit running, actually, we are behind the schedule, so I will make this sum up very, very, very brief. Is it not? Can the translators hear me? Yeah? Okay. I think it's working. So I will make this this quite brief. I think that today's discussion, we've had already 3 panels in this conference, has shown that there is a lot to discuss. There are many challenges that we are facing, and then there are many commonalities in many different countries in these challenges that we are facing. We've had 3 specific panels. We've discussed the transformational role and the power of the EU to inspire and to help the countries move in the right direction. We've talked about the challenges associated with implementation of EU-driven legislative agendas. And we have, in the end, talked about one of the key challenges that we are all facing everywhere, no matter where we are, inside the EU, outside the EU, in whichever country you want to name. And that is anti-Western propaganda. I found this discussion personally very interesting, and that tells me I have achieved a great result in getting a wonderful group of people together, because no discussion is good if you do not have the right people that are presenting, that are asking questions, that are engaged in the discussion. And I want to take this moment and thank you all once again, particularly our guests, our civil society representatives who were active and were asking questions. That is very much appreciated. Of course, to my colleagues from the Parliament. We still have a full day, not a full day, half a day tomorrow, but I think it will feel like a full day because we have very important topics that we will be discussing tomorrow. We will be talking about different modalities of engaging with the EU, and we will be talking about the future of the European Union, because there is no future of our cooperation if there is no future in the European Union. So we all want to explore and see where we are going with the European Union and how can we help each other. One of the things I think that has featured in all the panels, and we have talked about different things, different takeaways, we have talked about the fact that we have to work for people, definitely, in all the panels, that we have to deliver for the people. We have talked about the need to communicate with people, to engage the people in the work that we do, and that is very important since we are parliamentarians and we are the key people to ensure that, I think. And we have also stressed the importance of working together, of standing together, of striving together. I think together we are stronger. EU might not be perfect, but it is still the best peace project, as it was mentioned, I think, just in this panel by someone. And thank you for this, because it is the best project that is alive, is moving, is still inspiring, has a tremendous magnetic power for many, and we should keep it going, because that is what keeps many, many countries on the right track, on the track of reform, with all of our combined efforts. So thank you very much, and we will be seeing each other shortly at a different setting. Thank you.